hopping on. Lots of evening, and welcome to the second session of our Journey to the Ring webinar series, the Science of Show Nutrition. So tonight we'll be going through a dialogue and discussion on the science of show nutrition. For a fair number of you that are on, it looks as though we see some familiar names from last week where we went through why show feeds matter. That's available, the recorded version, through the Facebook page and link, and we'll make sure to get that link out to everyone on the group again today. My name's Andy Lanoux. I'm brand manager for Ralco Show. I'm happy to welcome you here tonight to have a chance to chat on show pigs during this time when we have limited access to the show ring. We thought it's a great time to get folks together to learn a little bit and talk a little bit about topics relevant for show pigs, including show nutrition tonight. So we're thrilled to have you, and thanks for joining. So during the course of tonight's discussion, I welcome everyone to go ahead and use the Q&A section. If you see on your webinar bar, there's a Q&A tab that allows you to ask questions. Certainly feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar tonight. We'll have time at the end where we'll address those questions. We certainly welcome that. We had some great interaction last week following our discussion topics on different questions that folks had. So please use that, and we look forward to chatting on those when we get to the end here. So we're going to be joined tonight by Ralco Joe Schneiden, as well as Dr. Russell Fent. Ralco Joe, of course, is our show pig specialist for the Ralco Show team, and Dr. Russell Fent is our director of swine technical team for Ralco. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and throw the show over to those two gentlemen. Thanks again for joining, and please remember the questions and answers for at the end of the session.
Thank you, Andy. Like Andy had stated there, I'm Joe Schneiden, show pig specialist here for Ralco Show, also known as Ralco Joe. We want to get into our agenda here for tonight's webinar. We'll look at some topics that we're going to cover here. Through that, we're going to talk here about what drives the performance in feed, our approach to show feeds, Ralco Premium Health Technologies, our diets and how to use them, and we'll start breaking down the role of supplements. With further ado, we'll turn it back over to Russell Fent so he can start in on what drives performance in feed.
Thanks, Joe. Just going to do a really quick review of last week, just a few of those things. So last week we talked about why show feeds matter, and really why we need to formulate those diets specifically for show animals, and the goals surrounding that. And one of the things that we talked about just briefly here was pig phenotype and their genetic makeup, really, that expresses that phenotype. But really what this graph showed was, if you take all the population of pigs in the world and we kind of rank them, let's say based on quality of some sort, phenotypic quality, and hopefully we did a good job where we end up with these top performing pigs as the show pigs that we're feeding. And so because of that, those pigs generally have a higher genetic potential for certain traits, whether it's muscle growth or just physical or, appearance, eye appeal, those types of things. And because of that, they often have a higher plane of nutrition that are required to meet those demands. And so from a targeting standpoint, a formulation standpoint, we do focus on composition of gain, whether that's muscle tissue or fat tissue gain. We focus on that, but besides that, we also pay extra attention to appearance, show ring appearance of those animals, and certainly a starting point of why, on a high level, why we need to feed those pigs differently, okay? And certainly the other thing we talked about was show pig stress, and we went in depth on this quite a bit. But just briefly, we talked about things related to transport stress, handling stress, continually those animals. Those pigs coming into contact with pigs from other environments when they go to a show. Remember we talked kind of about that kindergarten effect with that. We talked about pigs being exposed to hot environmental temperatures, particularly as we're showing through this time of year, going into the summer, being exposed to that. So there's a lot of things on stress specific to show animals. What's nice is while we know that we can't totally alleviate that stress from those pigs, we know that we can certainly help that significantly through the diet and through the type of feed that we feed and some of the components of the diet that we feed. And so some of the things that are affected by stress can be feed intake, and we certainly know that we can affect that by how we build the feeds and build the diets. Another thing would be gastrointestinal health. Just gut health of those animals certainly can be affected by any types of stresses and immune stresses that are there, or feed disruptions. And certainly that's going to be a huge key. And we're going to talk about that here further, okay? And then heat stress. Mentioned hot environmental temperatures, certainly something that pigs are going to be heat stressed at some point throughout the summer. And we do know that there's things that we can do with the type of diet that you feed that can help pretty dramatically with that. And so these are areas we're going to dive deeper into today, in terms of, you'll see how you would approach diets nutritionally, how that might have an impact on those things and helping those animals during those stresses. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go in, like I mentioned last week, we were kind of on a higher level. We talked about tag evaluations, and certainly things that are much more important that are on tags than is on tags. And so we don't always need to really evaluate tags in terms of identifying, comparing show feeds. And so today we're going to take a deeper dive into show pig nutrition, and really some of the things to look at, and give you an idea of how we approach some of those things from the science side of things. Okay. And so really from the Showmax program, there's really some key technologies that we use to build those. And you'll see how we do that, and you'll see how that might be applicable, or how you can evaluate your particular diets that you're using out there. But one of those that we'll spend quite a bit of time on here right away is this Enmax nutrition philosophy. This is really kind of our backbone and our core of our Showmax program. It's kind of the basis that we go off of, and then around that, then we start building even more things in terms of things in the diet that help in terms of eye appeal for those animals. And then we'll talk a little bit about some other new proprietary technologies that Ralco has developed, that are listed here: Microfuse Essential Oils and Activ-5. And so right away, we'll slide into talking about some of these, and we'll focus on Enmax at the beginning, okay? And so really, just to reiterate, there's certainly more things in a diet than what are on a tag. And we talked about these in depth, and if you want, you can go back, and as Andy mentioned, that link is available to watch the webinar from last week where we went through a lot of these things. And for sake of time, we won't go through that today, but just as a reminder, there's many things that aren't on a tag that are really in the background, are built into these diets. And so it's important that you understand what's in the feeds, and you really quiz your feed providers about a lot of these things that you can't read just by looking at a tag, okay? And so when we go into the Showmax diets, particularly in this, some of the things that we would focus on are our diets being cooler type of a diets. And so what does that mean? What does that mean that the diets are cooler? Well, how we approach that is, there's things that we look at in terms of net energy formulation, and we're going to talk about that in depth, how we value ingredients and how we formulate that, to that. Fighting the heat of digestion, and so we'll talk about the heat of digestion and how that relates to show animals and affects their performance and how well they perform in terms of not only growth, but just performance in terms of eye appeal and bloom and those types of things. And then amino acids versus proteins. We introduced some of that concept last week when we talked about that, and we'll go more in depth on that today. And so we're going to kind of talk about all these together as they because these complement all together in a way to make cooler type of a diets. And you'll kind of understand that further as we go through this, what that means. So the first thing we're going to look at is an energy scheme. So this is an energy schematic, and kind of try to walk through this a little bit. If you took a cup, a sample of your feed out of a bag, out of a cup. So you took a cup of feed, and we took that, and let's say we took it to a lab and used a special piece of equipment called a bomb calorimeter. You can take that sample and you can burn it in this equipment. And what that does is when you burn it, you're able to capture how much energy and measure how much energy is in that feed sample. So you completely burn it up, capture all that energy. And when you figure out what that is, that's called gross energy. That's the total amount of energy that's there. Now, we know that pigs can't use all that. It's not all digestible and usable by the animal. And so part of that, you'll see from this schematic that part of that is fecal energy loss. Yeah, some of it's lost through the fecal matter. And so when you subtract that out, then you say, okay, what I had was in this cup of feed, there was this much gross energy. We lost some through, when I fed it to a pig, we lost some through the feces, and what was left was digestible energy, okay? Now we know that some of it also is lost through the urine, and so when we subtract that out, what's there is metabolizable energy. And so what's important about that is most nutritionists, swine nutritionists in the U.S. will formulate diets on a metabolizable energy basis, which means they value ingredients according to how much fecal or urinary loss there are to get a good assessment of what the metabolizable energy value of that feed is. The thing that we do is we'll take it a step further. We actually go to net energy as the next step, because it takes into consideration another route of wasted energy, which is called heat increment or heat of digestion. So as that pig eats that feed and he breaks that down, all that takes energy to break that feed down and to absorb it and to incorporate it into tissue, and it all takes energy to do that. And so that's energy that's lost. Doesn't go to anything productive to the animal. And what we would rather do is we'd rather route that to something productive in terms of growth for the animal, whether it's muscle growth or fat deposition or something productive in that animal, rather than being lost energy. And so we will take that in consideration when we look at our ingredients and we formulate accordingly. And so if you think about a lot of nutritionists, most in the U.S., formulated on a metabolizable energy basis, when you look at these routes of energy and you see some percentages there, those are kind of some averages for an average diet. So for an average diet, that cup of feed, 18% of that energy on average is lost in the feces, 3% is lost in the urine, and then 20% is actually lost as this heat increment or this heat of digestion. And so if people formulate on a metabolizable energy basis, they're not factoring in the single greatest route potentially of energy loss that you lose when you feed that diet. And so you won't totally get rid of that, but certainly we want to focus in on value ingredients that minimize that heat increment, minimize that heat of digestion, and basically end up with, when you start with that cup of feed at the beginning, you have a diet that after it goes to the pig, you've got a higher amount of net energy, more energy that's available for that pig to use. So we'll circle back to this when we talk a little bit more, and it'll probably make more sense when we connect the dots when we talk about this related to high energy diets that we might use for show pigs. Okay. And so when we go from energy, now we're going to go into amino acids, and then we'll circle back and tie these together. Last week, we did talk some about amino acids versus proteins. And as you'll remember, one key thing that we talked about is pigs do not have a requirement for crude protein, which kind of makes us scratch our heads a little bit, because it's something that most people talk about with their show feed is what's the crude protein content, right? What's the protein content of your feed? And honestly, from a nutritionist standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of difference to us, because it's really the specific amino acids that make up that protein content. Those specific amino acids are what's important. So when we formulate those diets, we'll actually formulate those on those 10 essential amino acids. And what essential means that it has to be in the diet in some form for that pig. And so remember, we talked about, we can have two different diets, be the same crude protein diets, but they could have much different amino acid profile that makes up that. And so one of them they could both be 16% crude protein diets. One has a really good amino acid profile that supports the performance of that animal, and one could have a really poor amino acid profile where that animal doesn't grow well, doesn't look well, doesn't grow muscle well, those types of things. And so it's really important that you trust who you're working with in terms of the amino acid makeup that they formulate in their diets, okay? And so when we look at sources of amino acids, okay, let's back up and let's say, okay, what is an amino acid? We already said is it makes up crude protein, but what is it? Really, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And maybe more specific for pigs, they're the building blocks of muscle. To grow muscle, we've got to have these amino acids, and that's what makes up the protein that makes up muscle. And so certainly from that aspect, we see the importance that they have, okay? And so there's a couple of sources that we can look at for getting amino acids into the diet for pigs. One is protein-bound amino acids, which basically means any protein source where these amino acids, and you see on the screen here those colored boxes, those are different types of amino acids all linked together in a chain, and that would in a chain it's a protein. That's what makes up a protein. And so whenever an animal breaks those down, there are certainly a bunch of those that an animal needs, but maybe extra ones that they don't need, and we'll circle back to that. Now, examples of that would be plant proteins or animal proteins that you might see on a feed tag that would be added to a diet for those sources of amino acids. Okay, another source would be purified or crystalline amino acids. So these amino acids are already in their simple source. They're not in a chain. They're not linked together with other amino acids. They're already in that pure source. So some examples you might see on a feed tag would be L-lysine hydrochloride, D-L-methionine, L-tryptophan, L-threonine. Those would be some examples of ones that can be added to a diet to help meet those animals' requirements. Okay, so when we look at those in terms of a digestion step, the protein-bound versus crystalline amino acids, when we look at digestion, the protein-bound, like I mentioned, they're in a chain, and a pig cannot absorb a long chain of proteins. And same as humans, we have to use digestive enzymes to break those down into smaller pieces that can then be absorbed. And so all that, when a pig gets protein in his diet and he breaks those down, like I mentioned, a lot of those amino acids a pig needs, but there's a lot of those that the pig doesn't need as well. They might be above and beyond what he needs, or there are other amino acids that he doesn't need at all. They aren't essential. And so what happens is they still break them down, they still absorb them, and then they have to do something with them. The body realizes, hey, this is a bunch of extra I don't need, so I got to get rid of this. So it has to go to the kidney and be deaminated and excreted, and basically all that takes energy to break those down and get rid of that stuff. Now, what's different is the crystalline amino acids, the one that are in the pure form, they're already in that simple form and they don't require a digestion step. So they're just absorbed and they're ready to start building muscle as they need to. And so on the protein bound, as they break those down, that takes a lot of energy to break those down. And that's where some of that heat increment we talked about comes from, that heat energy loss from excess amounts of protein that they have to break that down. Okay. And so when we talk about crystalline amino acids, some of the values of using some of those pure amino acids as a portion of the amino acids in the diet is they're easily utilized and incorporated in muscle tissue. They help minimize some of our excess protein. One of the main ones we'll use a lot is soybean meal in our diet. So it minimizes the amount of excess that's there. And then what happens is, because of that, because the animal doesn't have to work to break down so much excess protein, they actually have less energy that's required to digest that. So there's more energy there for efficient growth, or more energy there for a fresher appearance in these show pigs or bloom and a performance of those animals. We also know that it results in less ammonia and odor. So you think from an odor standpoint in the barn, but what's also interesting about ammonia is excess amount of ammonia in the gut is actually negative in terms of gut health. And so you look at that from a gut health standpoint. And interestingly, we also know that if you feed less excess amino acids in the diet or excess protein in the diet, pigs will actually consume less water, have less requirement to consume less water consumption there. And we'll talk about that a little bit again here when we talk about how it relates to humans a little bit. So, okay. And one of the other things that we look at, keep in mind when we look at amino acid levels in the diet, we do research and determine what the optimum levels are. Now, in some of our show diets, we certainly look at different lysine levels, potentially based upon age of those animals that we might use. But what's interesting is the other 9 essential amino acids in there, we also know what levels those need to be, and we ratio those to lysine in the diet. And so, you know, like I mentioned last week, lysine is on the tag, but those other 9 amino acids aren't on a tag. And so certainly something that we look at from a research standpoint, we identify what's the proper ratio of all those amino acids that we use in the diet. Because if one of them is deficient, we're going to have issues with that. And so I think the next slide actually shows that when we look at the effect of an amino acid deficient or amino acid adequate diet in pigs. And so you see these two pictures here, and I think this is a pretty cool illustration. But you see that there's a loin. There you can see a cross section of the loin, or where the pork chop comes from, and you can see the loin eye area, that circular area is the loin eye. You should see one of those on both pictures, and then you see a belly on both pictures there. But let's look at the loin eye of both of those. And so you see these two pictures. One's an amino acid deficient on the left, one's amino acid adequate on the right. Which one of those loin eyes looks larger? If you just look at that circular outline there, which one of those looks larger? Well, it's the amino acid adequate diet. The one that's adequate, we already said the amino acids are the building blocks of protein, building blocks of muscle. And so we know that that pig had the ability and he had the tools there to grow that muscle. Now, the pig that was deficient in amino acids, something was deficient. It could have been just one. It doesn't have to be all 10. It could have been one of those amino acids deficient and actually prevented that muscle growth from growing like you wanted it to. Now, there's a secondary thing that's also cool here. And what does it look like if you guys are looking at the picture? What also looks to be an obvious difference between the two? Basically, it's the back fat that's on those. It's fat content all the way through. You see it through the belly too. But if you look particularly at that back fat, that outer layer of fat that's on that loin, you see that that's hugely different between these two. Now, in this example, both these sets of diets, the energy was the same. Energy was the same in both these sets of diets. So why would that amino acid deficient pig get so much fatter than that amino acid adequate pig? Well, basically, because that deficient pig didn't have the amino acids there to grow the muscle like his body wanted him to, like his genetic potential wanted him to. He couldn't meet that. He had to do something with the energy. So when a pig grows muscle, it takes amino acid, but it also takes energy to grow muscle. And so what happened with that deficient pig, he didn't have the amino acids there, but he still had all this energy. So what's he going to do with it? He lays it down as fat rather than muscle, and so he becomes fatter there. And so it's a really good illustration. And what I think is really cool too, to relate it to how we may feed pigs, think of an example where you may have had a really extreme, really heavy muscled pig, or somebody you knew did, and somebody gave them a recommendation of let's feed that pig a lower protein diet, right? Or let's feed him a lower amino acid level diet. They may say, hey, may even feed him a sow gestation feed, right? Because he has too much muscle. He's getting too much. We need to tone him down and cool him off some. And so essentially what you do when you do that pig has the genetic potential. He's wanting to put on a lot of muscle, but you're saying we're not going to give you the tools to put on too much, right? Because you might get tight and restricted and you can't walk well and soundness is an issue. And so when you do that, basically you do what's like the picture on the left, and you restrict him some where he doesn't overgrow that muscle, and in fact, sometimes that pig will get softer appearing, right? He may get a little bit more condition on him because you changed that. You basically lowered his amino acid level down to a level that was limiting for him, and he used that energy to maybe put a little more condition on. So a lot of people do that, but they don't always understand why they do those things. And this is a perfect example of why that occurs, okay? So the other thing about looking at amino acids in our diets, so we talked about 10 essential amino acids, so those are across the bottom. And in this graph, if we fed those pigs to 100% of what their requirement was for each of those amino acids, that would be that black line in the middle. And anything above that line is going to be excess. So in a typical diet, you might see out there, it'd be kind of those white lines, right? That they're going to be a lot of excess of those amino acids. Well, in our Showmax diets, with the approach we do, we're still meeting all their requirements that they need, certainly adequate and all that, but we're trying to reduce the amount of excess by reducing some of that excess protein that's in some of those diets. And so what's interesting with that, like I mentioned, pig doesn't have to work to break down so much of that, and it doesn't take a lot of energy to do that. So an example we talk about when Joe and I will do meetings with producers, with show pig folks on this, and youth, the adults actually probably catch on to this more, we'll talk about the Atkins diet concept. So if anybody remembers the Atkins diet concept, is basically eat as much protein as you want and you lose weight. And so, you think, well, how does that work? I can eat all the steak I want. How do I lose weight? Well, basically what you're doing with that diet is you're overloading your body. You're overloading your body with protein. You're making your body work to break all that down, all that excess protein down. Then it's digested, it's absorbed. The body realizes it doesn't need all this. It goes to the kidney, has to be processed, and then it's excreted. At that point, all that takes energy. And so your body works so hard to get rid of all that stuff, and you lose weight when you do that, right? And so that's really what we're trying to do, the opposite here, kind of the anti-Atkins, right? Where we're trying to take away that excess so the animal doesn't have to work so hard to do that. The animal doesn't make a lot of internal body heat by breaking those things down. Because think about eating a big old steak and how we generate a lot of heat internally. Well, we always joke about the meat sweats, right? That you eat so much protein that you can feel it at night, that you're hot and that kind of thing. And that's what we're trying to do different in the show pig world for our base concept to help those animals. So, and then if you go to the next slide there, that when you tie into looking at, now if we go back, okay, remember on the left, we talked about this energy scheme, right? That we're focusing on this net energy concept and trying to figure out where all the wasted energy goes. So now we add this to the right and we say, let's compare a typical diet to a Showmax approach, or how we might approach that. So let's say that the wasted energy are all these colors here, right? So the yellow is the amount of fecal energy loss. Okay, and let's say it's the same for this example for these two diets that we're looking at. And then let's say that energy loss is the same for these two diets. But then after that, in the red would be your heat increment, or that heat of digestion, or that energy it takes to break it down and get rid of it. And so if we can formulate on a net energy basis and try to reduce that heat increment, in this example, we cut it in half here. And what the result ends up being is more net energy, or more usable energy in that diet. And so what we're looking at is, in this Showmax diet, is more usable energy into that feed versus a typical feed out there. And that's really the core of what we're trying to get. And so this reiterates of why we talked about this last week, and we came back here to explain this, of how we can feed diets that are high energy without a lot of fat in the diets. So we talked a little bit last week about why it's not always good to look at the fat percentage on a diet. It doesn't always tell you 100% that it's relative to the energy level in the diet, right? So so because of that, we can feed higher fat, higher energy diets that are actually lower fat than maybe some other diets that are out there. And so this is really how we can do that. So, okay. And so this core concept results in, like I mentioned, higher energy diets without relying on a lot of fat. So we'll get questions a lot out there that, well, your diet's 5.5%, and let's say somebody else is 8% fat. Well, the assumption is the 8% fat diet, let's say, is a lot higher energy. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because fat's not the only energy source that's in there, and also because we're formulating and taking into account all the energy loss in there and trying to make that more efficient. We can actually have higher energy diets oftentimes than some of the high fat diets that are out there. Also, because of that, we have cooler diets, right? So there are less heat of digestion that are generated in that. And because of that, we actually have increased feed intake on our program, generally year round, but it's more exaggerated, more of a difference in the hot environmental temperatures throughout the summer. So we know it's critical to keep show pigs on the feed all through the summertime. When you haul them, you take them to a show, you expect them to eat, you need them to eat, all right, when you get to the show, because if they're not eating, they're ganned up, they don't look right, they don't have the fill they need. When you take them home, you need them to eat. And so, you want to maintain that consistent feed intake. And certainly this helps tremendously in order to do that, okay? And so if you look at temperature a little bit more closely here, this is a graph that's nice as a reference here. What it does is it shows body weight of pigs across the bottom, and what the white area, the white zone, is really the thermoneutral zone, or really the comfort zone for those pigs. And so this is always good to show to youth and to explain to them, that pig that's a 10-pound pig when he's born, or he's 3-4 pounds when he's born, 10-12 pounds when you might wean that pig. He likes it more of a 85-90 degree temperature, right? But you get that pig that's 290 out here. If you get that pig much above about 65-70 degrees, he doesn't like it very well, right? He starts to get heat stress. And so it's important to know that. The other thing that's important is, as an example here, we've got marked on here a 210-pound pig. On this example, he's heat stressed at about 76 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you then add a diet, go ahead, the next one. If you add a diet that then has a lot of heat increment in the diet, or creates a lot of heat, and basically what that does, that actually makes that 210-pound pig be heat stressed at even a lower temperature, because he has more heat load on his system. And so again, why we want to feed her a cooler type of a diet so they don't get hot as quick. Okay. The other thing we know specifically, when you have pigs that are, let's say, closer to show market size, right? Show weight. So you're saying 260 and above, let's say. If you get above about 65 degrees, the research tells us that those pigs will actually reduce their feed intake typically. So this data shows, and I would, if you talk to any of us, if you talk to your kids or ask them, okay, what do you think's hot? Sometimes anything above 65 doesn't seem hot to them. But for a bigger pig like that, this data showed that if it was 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, those pigs actually reduced their voluntary feed intake by about 13%. Now, if you took it to 83 to 86 degrees, they reduced their feed intake by about 26% compared to 65 degrees. And you can imagine if it was 95 or 100 degrees, like it gets to be at some of the times that we're showing here in July and August, that becomes an issue. And we certainly know that it's aggravated by these high heat increment type diets. And so it's really important why we feed a cooler type of a diet, keeping them on feed during those times. The other thing we know about feed intake is that anytime that feed intake is up and down, or pigs are off feed completely, it's really detrimental to gut health, that gut microflora and just gut health itself. You guys know lots of things in terms of things that's a risk that triggers things like ulcers on an extreme example, but even less extreme than ulcers, just your minor gut disturbances and issues like that certainly can be affected by up and down feeding patterns. Okay. And so really that's really the first backbone that we talked about here is this INMAX concept, right? Where we're talking about net energy, we're talking about amino acid formulation, cooler type of a diets, and those types of things in your nutrition program as your backbone. Then we start building around that. We build things that, especially ingredients that are going to be in there for eye appeal for those animals, right? Whether they're specialty protein products, specialty milk-based, lactose-based products that are in there from an animal appearance standpoint and from a palatability standpoint. And then we add things there from health components as well. And a couple of those in particular, the last two technologies we'll touch on just briefly here, that these are Rauco proprietary technologies that they've developed over the years. And one of those is microfused essential oils, and the other one is Actifib. And so we'll touch on those just real briefly here. The first one here is microfused essential oils. So you guys, you've heard essential oils, I'm sure, in the human side of things in the last couple of years for sure, that's something that's talked about a lot. The interesting thing is it's been in the livestock side for quite a while, and in particular, Rauco is the leader in that area in the industry. And we've been doing research with essential oils for over 15 years, and probably close to 20 years now in terms of essential oil research. Now, you start at the beginning, you think, well, this snake oil, there's not much to this, there's not a lot of research. Well, because of that, we had to develop a lot of the research. And what we found a lot of interesting things, not only with growing animals and show animals, but sows and those types of things, in terms of supporting health and supporting immune function in these animals. And it's really a key thing that we've learned some things about. Okay. One of the things that in general that you see that's been reported just out in the general press that's out there is these essential oils having some antimicrobial activity to them. to being able to combat a lot of the pathogenic type bacteria that are negative towards gut health. So whether it's your E. coli's or salmonellas or your clostridiums and those types of things things would be examples of causing scour issues or gut issues in pigs. And so they've been really, there's data out there that shows that out in the literature. Okay. Thing we've also learned is that from a feed freshness standpoint, that by adding essential oils to the diet, we can really reduce the amount of yeast and mold counts that are there that are in that diet. So it gives you a lot of confidence in terms of how fresh that feed is. If that's in the diet, that helps tremendously to keep that feed fresh, which certainly would help in terms of palatability and intake and those types of things. Okay. Then the other thing that we know is these microfused essential oils are very high antioxidants. And so we know these animals, they show animals that are high performance, they have a high metabolism, they have a high need for high antioxidant capacity in their diet. And we won't go into a lot of that, but if you're interested, down there at the lower right, it shows an example. But that is a YouTube video that's actually out there that you can go out and watch about microfused essential oils. So if you're interested in more detail on that, I encourage you to go look at that. It's pretty interesting on the background of that. Okay. And so that's a real brief thing about microfused essential oils. We've done so much work with that. We could probably talk all day about that information, but we don't want to get caught up for sake of time here today. If you certainly have more questions on that, on the essential oils, reach out to us. We can help, or if you got questions tonight, shoot them through the chat deal down there, and we can answer them here at the end. The last one I'm going to touch on briefly is the other proprietary technology. And when I get through this, Joe's going to talk about the feeds themselves. So hang on for Joe here, and he'll give you the application part of this. But Acti-5 is the last one I'm going to talk about here, and that one is an interesting one. So it's added to our feeds and to all the feeds as a consistent insurance policy to keep the gut health going in these pigs. So if you look on the data on the left first. So if we fed two different diets, pigs that are fed a control diet versus Acti-5, and in the control, you see that there's levels of lactobacillus in the blue. So those are your good guys. That's your good bacteria that are there. And then in the, I guess that's orange maybe, that Clostridia there, that's a bad pathogenic bacteria. So that's your bad guys there. What you see is when you feed those animals Acti-5, your lactobacillus, your good bacteria increase, and your bad bacteria, pathogenic bacteria, go down. And so basically what we're doing, we're providing a good food source for these, for the good bacteria in the gut to grow on, and they can crowd out the bad bacteria. So an example from the show side, you have pigs that go off feed, or they got gut issues. One of the common things people talk about, say, hey, go get some yogurt, feed those pigs some yogurt, right? And that'll help their gut. They're not wrong. That's right? Because you're feeding, oftentimes with that, you're feeding the good bacteria, and oftentimes it's a lactobacillus you're feeding to those pigs to try to help that gut microflora, that gut population of bugs that are in the gut. What's different about how we would approach this, we're not providing the bugs, the live bacteria themselves. We're actually providing the food source that those bacteria like to grow on. So we're capitalizing on the lactobacillus that are already there in the gut, and we're trying to feed them and grow them right there at that level. Now, the other thing that's different, if we're in these examples where people say go feed yogurt, usually that's in a problem time, right? Where you've got an issue and you do that. The nice thing about the Acti-5 is we put it in the feed all the time. It's in there all the time. And so we have it as a main, maintenance type of a thing to keep the gut going at all times. So we feel really good about that. Okay. And then the last part of this is all comes together for gut health, right? Whether it's microfused essential oils and the Acti-5, and even the diet components and how we formulate that. There's really three main pillars that we look at for gut health. So this picture really looks at, it's a picture of a small intestine. So at the top would be the gut lumen, or the sort of the inside of the small intestine, and then you've got the gut wall lining there. So really three main things we look at. We want to have really good bacteria, a good population of microflora that are in the gut. That's the key. We don't want to disrupt that. We want to maintain that good microflora that's there. Second thing is a healthy gut wall. And so we talk a lot about gut barrier function. And what that means is we want to let nutrients and things in that we want in, but we want to keep bad things out, pathogenic bacteria from crossing into the bloodstream and that type of thing. And so to do that, we want to have a really healthy gut wall. It also helps in terms of nutrient absorption of the diet too. And then the third thing is a strong immune system. So we had a quiz question last week. I don't know if anybody remembers, right? But what was the percentage of the immune system that was associated with gut tissue? We talked about it being 70% of the pig's immune system is associated with his gut, which tells us if we can keep that pig's gut healthy, more than likely we're going to have a healthy pig all the way around. So again, another reason why we focus so much on gut health. Okay, and so that's that's really the last of those things. Those things all come together, like I said, with that core. Those the animal health aspects of it, and then the things I talked about in terms of specialty ingredients for eye appeal. All those things come together in terms of our Showmax program, and certainly things that you should be asking questions about from your feed manufacturer, your supplier, about those tools that you have there. So I'm going to pass it over to Joe here. He's going to take what we learned here in terms of talked about in terms of science and tell you how those come together, how those come to life within our actual feeds. And so I'll let Joe kind of take it over from there. So, and like I said, if you have any questions as we go, shoot those at the bottom. We'll answer them at the bottom. So go ahead, Joe. You can kind of get into the application.
Yep. Thank you, Russell.
Yep.
So when we start talking about the Showmax difference, like Russell had talked about, we know that they are higher energy diets without the reliance of fat. Because of the Enmax technologies, the formulation technologies that we use, we get cooler diets. So our heat increment is a lower heat increment, and we see a higher rate as far as consumption goes and performance goes during hot temperatures. And typically year round, we see a higher rate of digestion as well. When we look at our proprietary technologies that are in these feeds, we incorporate Enmax, our essential oils, and Actify into these feeds. And this is to sum up all of the things that Russell's talked about. So we know that all of these technologies will be in each diet that we have. So when we look at the Showmax difference, we know that we have a focus on composition of game or the growth rate. We also know that the appearance for the show ring and gut health, immune function, and the tolerance of stressors, we know all of these play in together when we incorporate all these technologies into our feeds. And we see this kind of performance day in and day out, and we can trust that this performance is going to be there for us by using these products. Next, we look at the differentiating factor here. For me, when we compare the Showmax program to some of our other competitors, is simplicity. We see this on a regular basis. We'll have a lot of customers that come to us that are confused. They look at some of the other feed programs that are out there and they see that, hey, maybe there's a 16% diet if we just focus on protein. They look and they see, hey, this program over here, they offer 4 different 16% protein diets, but they've got all different kinds of fat levels, maybe lysine levels. We really don't know which one to use. We at Ralco Show are proud to say that our program is simple and it's easy and there's not a lot of confusion there. It's shown to be very effective from the beginner level all the way to the grands at OYE or the grands at the World Pork Expo or some of those other very high elite type shows. So we've seen with that simplicity a lot of success there at those same levels without having to offer all of those different diets all in one. And so when we look at all the Showmax diets that we have, we keep it very simple, like we said. We have Surge, Crave, Crank 'em, and Crease It. So that's 4 diets that we offer compared to some of those other competitors that have multitudes of different diets that get extremely confusing. We like to say that with the Showmax program, it's simple, it's easy, but it's also very effective when we look at this program as well. to get started here on and to talk about each one of these different diets, we'll start with Surge, and that's a diet that the name does exactly what it says. Those pigs seem to really eat and consume when they're on this feed. That's a great feed that we like to start out with on those pigs when we bring them off the starter feeds or we buy them in a cell and bring them home. This is a great option there for us to get started on. We like to feed that in these general ranges of 35 pounds to 100 pounds. Sometimes this feed or this diet can be fed longer, depending on the phenotype of your pig. And so some of those pigs that are softer in their muscle composition, or maybe a little fatter, a little fluffier in their appearance, they could stay on Surge a little longer, just to help keep that muscle tissue to grow and to help keep them growing in the proper manner. Next, we go to Crave. That's our bread and butter diet that we have. That's one that most of our customers are going to use for the longest period of time, and we use that from 100 pounds on. That's a diet that does exactly what the name says as well. Those pigs eat it very well. They consume very well. It's highly palatable. That diet is a 16, but it still feeds with a lot of muscle shape, plenty of shape as far as top shape goes and rump shape goes, without sacrificing a lot of body. So those pigs tend to go ahead and flesh and bloom on that feed without burning too much up high and getting too extreme up high. We also see a lot of added benefits there with skin and hair when we look at this diet as well when feeding Crave. And like we talked earlier, to point back out again earlier, some of these diets show like this is a 16% diet with a 5.45% fat content in there. Yes, the fat content seems low, but like Russell talked earlier, we don't have to form or fit as much fat into these diets in order to get that same kind of fluffiness or bloom that we're looking for because of the way we formulated these feeds. So we need to always remember that when we just look at our diets and we look at our protein, lysine, and fat levels there. We know that there is some variation and some change there when we compare them to some of those other diets that are on the competitive side or the competitive market. From there, we go into Crankum. And so that's our Paylean feed that we have. That's our 16 feed. I like to tell people that that's essentially the Crave diet with Paylean mixed into it. And that's our go-to diet when we need to have those pigs that we're looking to put them on a Paylean feed. That's we're wanting to use some Paylean, but we don't want to use a lot all at one time. That's an extremely safe type of Paylean feed that we can put those pigs on. It's just going to help to add bulk and mass and not screw up their skeletons. So it's going to keep everything in check, keep everything in the right areas, but help to also bulk them where they need to bulk and mass them where they need to mass at the same time. We like to use that for the last 90 pounds of gain. There's a lot of mixing and matching in there we can do with this diet as well through different size areas as well with this diet. And from there, we fall into our next diet, which is our newest diet that we came out with here this last fall. We got to use Crease-It there in some testing there last summer. We saw great results there. It does exactly what its name is as well. It's designed to help crease those pigs as far as crease them on the top side of their skeleton. But the thing that I love about this diet is we look at that 19% protein, and yeah, that's a little higher protein than what Surge is. But what I like about it is we don't sacrifice body while we're trying to get that natural shape up high. Those pigs seem to really shape up high, but they also fluff down low, and they also expand there in their belly, and we don't burn them there in those areas. This is a really universal type of diet as well, and that's one thing that I like about that as well. We can feed that to those pigs that maybe they're coming off of the starter feed and we feel like we need to feed them a little hotter diet maybe. The Crease-It's our choice. Or if we're trying to jackpot these pigs and maybe we need to mix a little something in there in our feed to help keep that top shape, keep them creased up high and not try to burn them there in their belly, Crease-It's our option to go to as well. And then we also like to use this feed as well there at the end, in the end game there. We just need more mass, need more shape. We also, there again, we don't want to burn them in their belly, sacrifice body. Crease-It's our go-to feed that we like to use there. I do want to note there as well, this is a pellet feed that we have there. The rest of our diets are all meal form feeds. And we felt like when we designed Crease-It that we wanted to come out with a pellet. For one, it's going to give our customers a little different type of texture to work with when working with those pigs. And it's also going to give the pigs a little different type of texture as well. So we get the best of both worlds there. We can mix Crease-It in with different diets, or we can feed it solely on its own, and we're going to get those same added benefits and effects that we like to see out of that diet as well. And then from there, we can look at our diets. We've got a nice table that we can look at here, and if you go to our website or you get our show booklet, we've incorporated this table in there on these feeds and also with our supplements as well. And so this is a nice table to show that when we can use these feeds through different times or different periods that we've got our projects on, and we can incorporate these different diets in there at different time frames depending on what those projects need. There again, we can mix and match some of these diets as well. We've got some that like to mix Surge and Crave, or Crave and Crank them together, or mix Crease-It in there as well with any of those diets. They're very functional. They work together extremely well. We like to tell people just use them how you feel like your projects need to enhance or need to change in those different areas to help those projects reach their full potential. And then we want to talk about our Showmax Complete lineup. So we didn't touch on our sow feeds or our starter feeds. If anybody would be interested in learning more about our starter program, our Ignite starter program, or our sow feeds, you can reach out to us through journeytothering.com as our email address, or you can reach us there on our Facebook page, reach out to us there on our website as well, or try to contact us in person there through our phone numbers. We can guide you and help you through these different stages there with our sow feeds and our Ignite starter program as well. Also, I'd like to touch on there when we want to keep it, we talk about keeping things simple. We've got 2 sow feed diets that we use. We've got a gestation and lactation diet. Extremely easy there to dictate where we use either one of those feeds. Very, very positive feedback that we get back there from our customers on those sow feeds. And then when we look at our Ignite starter feeds, we've got a pre-starter, a starter 1, and a starter 2. So simple, easy 3-step program there in our starter diets as well. And then we fall into our show feeds of Surge, Crave, Crank 'em, and Crease-It that we just talked about as well. There again, if you've got any questions on these diets, need any help there with utilizing these diets in any way, or maybe there's something in there that you're wondering about that I may not have covered, feel free to reach out to us there through those different outlets that I just talked about, and we can get with you there and help guide you to the best that we can and to the best of our abilities and help you to be successful.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a good overview through kind of the science of show nutrition on Ralco Show side of things. What I really like about this is we're going through this is we had some questions that we kind of brought up in the first webinar, just talking about good questions to ask about show feeds. And one of the things that I think we're pretty proud of at Ralco Show is the depth of our technical knowledge that runs our show feeds. And really, when we say a good question to ask your show feed provider is, how are your feeds different than other companies? We love that question because we believe that we're fundamentally building these diets differently from the ground up. That NMAX technology of really fighting back against wasted energy, creating those cool diets that the pigs love to eat, and really providing that amino acid profiles that Dr. Fent talked about that really drive the kind of gain that we want. The discussion of who formulates your show feeds, a great deal of trust in Dr. Fent, as well as the rest of our team of swine nutritionists and PhD nutritionists that support our diets and their evaluation. But right there, we know the guy who's in charge of the Ralco Show diets. Where does your innovation and product enhancements come from? We talked a little bit on the last webinar as well about kind of Ralco's primary business on the commercial side of things and our investment into research technologies and resources. So commercial application barns where we can run research, always looking at the newest application of amino acids and other technologies to drive both animal health and performance. What can you do for animal health? I think that's the big thing that's hidden within Ralco Show is the value of things like the essential oils and the Actify driving that gut health, which is a huge differentiator. There's a lot of feeds out there that aren't giving you that in their feeds. They're trying to sell you that as a supplement. And these are some things that are built completely into the Showmax diets, as well as some of our toxin support products that really help to control some of the impact that toxins can have as well. A lot of goodies are built right into the Showmax diets, which is why people say they tend to feed so easily. What can you do for animal stress? Another one with the essential oil tools that are in there, the stress, the digestive stress that's eliminated or reduced because of the way those diets are built. Another wonderful differentiator there. Intake during heat stress is a big issue. You go to shows and it's always hot at the show, and keeping those animals on feed, those cooler diets with that NMAX technology makes a big difference in that consumption side of things. How are you formulated to be easily digestible? That stress of digestion is really what NMAX technology is about, and built to be minimal digestive stress and keep intake up and keep that animal healthy. And then how do you ensure ingredient quality? That's a big one of consistency of feeds, and how consistent is your diet that you're buying, and does it matter which dealer you buy it from? What are they putting inside those diets? With our regional manufacturers, we really do dictate those feeds are exactly the same when you're getting them from one dealer from the other as far as how they're built. And the ingredient quality is all managed and monitored by Ralco on those feeds. So consistency and freshness is something that we absolutely pride ourselves on through our network. And then, the other part of that, do you use any byproducts? And certainly Showmax products are all formulated with the quality of the diet is our priority and not the savings of money. So you get that predictability with the elimination of byproducts in those diets to really help that come together. So those are some of the questions that we put together to ask that we think are important. And then the last one, of course, is how easy is it to implement your program? One of the things that we feel is when those diets are really fundamentally built well, and they're built to minimize digestive stress, and they're built with the amino acid profile to help those animals grow, there's not a need for a lot of diets when they're foundationally solid. And that's really where we put our resources into building really foundationally solid diets that work well with your animals and are easy to feed. So with that, that's kind of the conclusion here. We're going to jump in and do some question and answers. We got a couple of them rolling in, quite a few rolling in. Great crowd tonight, by the way. The participation numbers were fantastic. Join us again next week. We're going to talk about finishing for the show ring. We're going to talk about supplements and kind of their role in finishing out these individual projects and how they can work together with the feeds there. But we're going to hop right into the question section here. We got a few here. Certainly, if you see your panel for your webinar, there should be on top, you should see an opportunity with the Q&A section to go ahead and ask some questions. We got a few coming in here. We welcome as many as you'd like. We'll stick around and answer questions for quite some time. So one of the questions I got here, let me just scroll back down, is found some good interest in that chart, I believe, where we're showing heat stress. And he's talking about a 230-pound pig and said, what temp was that 230-pound pig was showing heat stress at as far as backing off the diets? I don't know if either of you've got that chart in front of you to talk to that a little bit, or I can find it here on the slides as well.
Yeah, yep. At about a 230-pound pig, at least from that data set, right? That was a particular data that put a heat stress on that animal. Probably is going to be about 75 degrees or so. And again, sometimes when they're heat stressed, it's not an obvious thing, right? I mean, you see the obvious ones. When we do youth meetings and stuff, we ask kids, how do you know the pigs are heat stressed? Well, they say, well, they're panting or they're laying in the water or, those kinds of things. And certainly those are more exaggerated, right? When they get pretty hot there. But some of the mild heat stress that you don't even know, where a pig just backs off of eating some, and he's laying around, he reduces his activity. He does all those things because he doesn't want to do something that makes him hotter, right? Same thing with feed. He doesn't want to eat something that makes him hotter. So that's why they back off of those high heat increment feeds. But so, 75 degrees or so is what this says in terms of where a pig might be his reach, the beginning of a heat stress or upper critical temperature for about a 230-pound pig. So, yep.
The other thing I think is really interesting about that chart is as that weight of that animal goes up, of what a difference those high heat increment diets make of when that heat stress kicks in, especially at the weights we're typically showing these animals. I think that plays a big part into that there. I got a question about talking about Paylean. We've got some discussion there. They had one question regarding Paylean about if we're feeding Paylean, do we need a particular lysine level in that feed for it to gain performance?
Yeah, good question. So kind of goes back to our muscle development discussion we had, right? So what's the building blocks of muscle or amino acids, right? So if with Paylean, what Paylean does is it increase muscle growth of a pig, protein deposition or muscle growth. So it increases that muscle growth. So in order to do that, it's got to have all the amino acids there it needs to do that. If the amino acids are too low, it just won't get the muscle growth that you expect from Paylean. So one problem that people have sometimes is they'll get a Paylean supplement and they'll add it on top of a feed that may not have enough amino acids in it, and then when they do it, they say, well, that Paylean's not working, and well, you got to have the fuel there, right? The amino acids for that Paylean to work. And so to answer that question, usually you need about a 1% lysine diet that you're feeding that pig when you're using Paylean to have enough amino acids to get that Paylean response. So you see some diets out there that may be like a 0.8 or 0.85 lysine diets that are being used out in the field. If you add Paylean to that, you might get some of a response, but you won't get your full Paylean response because you've limited how many amino acids are there. So yeah, certainly something to think about. And Joe, that Crankum diet, I think is like a 105. Is that right? 105 lysine, I think is what we formulated that one too. So that's why we keep that one there, is for that Paylean. So
yeah,
yes, that's correct.
Brought in another new question kind of on topic, so I'm going to skip that one ahead. And if we don't have Paylean in the future, which diets would you recommend them using?
Yep. So for me,
question. I'll let Joe talk about that one.
Yep. So for me, that was part of the reason why this Crescent diet was designed. Not only from a pellet choice or a different option for our different customers, but also looking ahead to the future. If we can't have a Paylean product out there, we thought that Crescent was a great option to be able to use. And when we talk about that again, that feed is designed to help really shape them up high. And so when I talk about up high, I'm talking about back shape, muscle shape in their back and in their loin, and then go ahead there in the seat of their pants or in their ham. It's to help shape them there in those areas. And once again, when we start adding a lot of that protein level or a lot of high amino acids or a lot of high heat increment, we start losing a lot of belly and body shape out of those animals. And this feed's designed to help keep that body shape in there, keep that belly and that fluff, and also help to shape them up high. And so that's why we came up with that Crescent diet there. Yep.
Great, thank you. Another question here we've got is talking about asking if there's any oats in the feeds.
Yep, for sure. We use oats in all of our show diets. We see a value of doing that. I know a lot of people use those separately or add or supplement those, but we put them right into the diet because we see a big value of using oats in those diets. It's a really good, really digestible ingredient for pigs. And it also has a lot of soluble fiber in oats that are actually really good for the gut as well. And so we certainly do that. And Joe can probably speak a little bit to that just in terms of we feed meal diets, and you can see oats in there and that kind of thing, right?
Yep. Typically, we'll see those, like you said, when we feed those meal form feed diets, we're going to see those oats that are added to those diets in those feeds every day when we feed them. Certainly, from a feeder standpoint, we always feel like when we add those extra fibers into those diets, we feel like we get an added gut response out of those added fibers, and so we feel like it's more of a buffer there for their gut to keep that gut functioning properly there, and to help with consumption as well.
That's good. We got another question here regarding they liked the discussion on the cooler diets. They thought that made a lot of sense. Really never heard show feeds talked about in that manner before, so they appreciated that discussion. And the question is based on that, do you end up seeing different feed consumptions with the Ralco show feeds versus other show feeds?
Yep. So typically, comparing, you go into different barns and you see some of these other diets or competitive diets that are in some of these other barns lined up right next to, like, say, Ralco show diets. Yes, we do see an added advantage, the majority of the time. Those pigs are going to tend to eat just a little better on these Showmax diets and perform just a little better. And you can always, I can just about tell when I walk into those barns and tell if they've been on the Showmax diets versus some of those other competitors. And I say that because they have that same kind of muscle composition. Their skin and hair looks fairly the same. And they just have that fluffier look to them, that healthier look to them, comparing them to some of those other diets. And so for me personally, yes, I can see those differences.
It's a good question. We got again the question and answer Q&A section down in your webinar bar. We got time for just a couple more questions here, but if you've got one kind of burning, feel free to send that in yet. I saw one here earlier. Had to do with palatability and asking about our diets and what we do to our feeds to make them more palatable.
Yeah, good question there. So it's multifaceted, probably from a palatability standpoint. So we talked about part of that. Part of that is how they're built in terms of promoting a cooler type of a diet. But in terms of actual, palatability and them going after the feed, we do several things. We talked some about the essential oils we add. Those certainly have a flavor component to it and an aroma component. You can smell those in the diet. That's something that's there. We also use some milk-based ingredients, some specialty ingredients, and some colostrum-based ingredients that actually promote intake. We use some specialty proteins that are in there as well that actually help to that our research tells us that stimulate intake, and so we use some of those as well to promote that. And then we use some fat, specialty fat products, so some that's got some flavor component to them as well. And then we also have a flavor that we make in house that we add to the diets too, from a flavoring standpoint, so you can smell that in the diet too. So you get all those sort of go together again. It reinforces why we're trying to drive intake, have a really palatable diet that those pigs will go to every day in your hand feeding them. So, yep.
That's great. Good question. And I think that's a question from someone who was probably on the webinar last week when we talked a little bit about palatability as well. So that's what we've got for questions. If anyone else wants to get one in yet here, we got just a little bit of time, but just as a reminder, we are on again next week, finishing for the show ring, getting into the supplements, some of their usage, how they can round out your project. So if you've got the opportunity to join us again next week at 7:30 on Thursday, we'd love to see you again back with us. So we appreciate everyone taking the time to join us tonight, and we look forward to hopefully chatting with you next week. So thank you guys, and thank you, Joe, and thank you, Russell, for your time.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.